Welcome to another episode of First Down by CoachTools. Today I'm here with Coach Matthew Barnett. Thanks for coming on, Coach.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
So Coach Barnett, he is the head strength and conditioning coach and defensive line coach at Austin High School in Fort Bend, Texas, not Austin. So to kick things off, Coach, can you just share with the audience a little bit about your background and how you've gotten involved in coaching?
So for me, I grew up in the Houston area, which is where Fort Bend is, in a town called Katy. We had a pretty good football team growing up there in Katy High School, and we had, when I was a kid, they made their, in the 80s they were horrible when a man named Coach Johnston took over and kind of created a very traditional powerhouse that's continues to go. He brought in a defensive coordinator named Gary Joseph, who's now the head coach at Katy, and they've been there. Coach Johnson retired in 2003, and Coach Joseph keeps it up, but he's been there for close to 40 years. But the tradition, like we started going to state title games in 1994 and lost, and then won in 97, 98, got kicked out for UIL rules for a kid forged a progress report. 99 lost. 2001 got beat by Vince Young in the second round, and then 2002 was my season, and we got beat by 4 points in the semifinals. Then my brother, it's just a tradition of winning. It's a powerhouse school where you have a big time community, to the point that I'll even say this: my parents are still season ticket holders, and they're not the only ones. There's probably about 2,000 parents in the crowd whose kid hasn't been in Katy High School since 2007. And I've coached against Katy as a coach, and my parents have still been on the other side in red, supporting Katy, and then they'll go to my games whenever Katy isn't playing. But that tells you kind of the level of powerhouse and the tradition that Katy is. And it's what's kind of embedded in me, and the championship mentality. I've been lucky to be hired in some of my early stops at Austin Anderson High School in Austin, Texas, by my quarterback coach at Katy. I've worked for one of the other secondary coaches when I was there at another town in Sweeney. And it's something that gave me a bedrock into football coaching. It taught me what winning tradition looks like. All those things that a lot of times coaches never get an opportunity to experience or understand from a firsthand experience. It's been kind of the foundation for who I was as a coach. And when I went to college, I originally went for a Bible degree and was going to be a pastor, and kind of got into church work, and wasn't something that I kind of liked or enjoyed too much. There's a lot of struggles with pay and different things like that. And so I enlisted in the military as a chaplain assistant. We had to do all the work for the chaplain and make sure they were not breaking the rules or doing anything wrong. And did that for 4 years after college. And then kind of looked around after trying to figure out what's next after the military. It was either I had tried out for several police departments, thought about going back into ministry, and then kind of sat down one day and really thought about who had the biggest impact on me, whether it was my spiritual faith or my just everyday life. And I had thought about my quarterback coach and my other coaches at Katy, and that kind of gave me a calling and a kind of do the same impact on students and student athletes, to where so much to where I've seen it, where when I've looked into jobs, I've had coaches go to bat for me and be recommendations on my resume. I've had coaches that I had hire me, and I have had amazing opportunities because of kind of the community and relationships that are built through coaching with players and fellow coaches, that I want to pass that on and really be an impact on student athletes. Because I mean, football only lasts, like we tell kids all the time, that you're only guaranteed 3.5 years of playing football when you enter into high school. and you got 76 years to live your life, but those 4 years are going to impact those 76 years more than anything else.
Yeah, no, it's 100% true. And we were talking about before we started recording just how big high school football is in Texas. And I didn't even realize in Texas you have season ticket holders for for high
The
school.
line will form.
Wow.
And it was kind of nice because I worked at 2 Katy ISD schools, and I was a junior high coach for a little bit because I thought maybe to get out of high school because it is a big time commitment with Saturdays and Sundays. And I'd been at a program that struggled. And so I went to Katy ISD where I grew up, and I went to a junior high feeder, and junior high staffs work for the high school staffs. And when I worked, our feeder was a team called, or high school, Katy Taylor. And to get to the press box, you had to take the elevator in Legacy Stadium. That was the new stadium. I never got to play in that stadium as a player because they had the old roads that just has the normal walk-up ramp. But it felt pretty cool to ride an elevator to a press box, and it's sometimes a nicer stadium than even NRG is. And so that's what Texas high school football is like.
Yeah. No, and for somebody like me, not from Texas, obviously, it's like it really is totally different. So like, what was that like transitioning from, like, obviously you were a player and then you went into a different field and then got back into football. Can you talk about like that transition, especially when you first got into coaching?
So the kind of the hardest part is to figure out. There's several different variations that are very hard to kind of figure out when you're either in a career or college, and then you don't have playing background beyond high school experience. And so the first part is just figuring out how to be a teacher, because in the state of Texas, you have to have a teaching certification. You don't have to have a teaching degree, but you have to have a certification. So you got to do the lesson plans, you got to make tests, you got to keep up with grades, and you got to keep that principal happy, because if they're not happy, then you could lose the coaching option and you could be fired basically. Nowadays it's a little bit harder to get fired because there's a shortage, but you got to make sure and keep that principal happy and do good job in the classroom. And then the other aspect is trying to learn a playbook and a philosophy and schemes when all I knew was what I had in high school. I wasn't a college player and didn't transition to another playbook. And so trying to translate all the language and verbiage and philosophies and all the variations of philosophies that you may never have touched as a player, now you got to kind of have to learn them as a coach and assistant coach and match it to whatever the coordinators and the head coaches want. And so that is like drinking from a fire hose, because there's some great coordinators out there, there's some great head coaches out there, and there's some guys that all their stuff doesn't make sense and they think the kids understand and no one understands.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that goes back to just like, maybe for the coordinators watching, like, make yourself palatable so everybody can actually understand what you're talking about. And for the young guys out there, like, and I'm sure you can attest to this too, coach, put in the hours. Like, don't just expect to overnight know what you're doing. Things take time, and you have to know that it's a process. And, from my playing days, like I played Division III ball at Gettysburg College in Pennsylvania. And over the past couple of years, I've been like helping a youth team. And, it's not like, it's definitely not the same as high school coaching, but it's always like, you just have to understand that whatever you're doing, it's a process, and it's never going to be the same as it was at one place you were before.
Oh, but and I have to give you credit because I've done a little bit of like 7-on-7 with my son's team, and that's herding cats. That's even I've the lowest level I've ever gone into official coaching was 7th grade, and that's a challenge just to get guys into attendance lines and you have the kid that's only wearing his shoulder pads, his helmet, and no pants, and running around somewhere picking grass.
Oh
And
yeah.
so um, that is the challenge. And my advice, because one of the things that's kind of a misnomer in our career field, and there's kind of an allure with hiring NFL guys or big time college guys that have all this playing experience. But one of the lessons I've learned, if you're someone that's not, a lot of those times those guys don't have as much success in coaching because they never had to look at the fundamentals. They don't they looked at their talent, they relied on their talent. They may have gotten fundamentals from a lot of their coaching staffs and programs they were a part of, but they don't understand how to break that down. Many times the less talented guys have a greater understanding of how to break down what makes a player better, what makes a guy go left faster or right faster, or how can this kid that I have, because I don't have another linebacker or I don't have another receiver, how can we put him in the best position to be successful versus we ran this in the NFL or this route in college. Why isn't he getting there? I don't understand.
Yeah.
And you are beating your head against the wall versus maybe we need to shorten this route. Maybe we need to adjust and match what our skill level is. And there's sometimes a big challenge with guys that have been at the highest levels to understand athletes at the lowest levels. And that was one of the things growing up at Katy we learned is that number one, we had a mentality. You ask any Katy kid, and a lot of coaches will disagree. Like you win state titles, you do all this kind of stuff. You're team of the decade, you're ranked in the nation. But you ask any Katy kid, y'all have a lot of talent, and they'll tell you no, we don't, because there's such a team-driven mentality. And we would always have the mantra: we beat talent. We beat those single guys that are going to go to that are 5-star athletes. And it kind of I'm sure we had more talent than what we were kind of given, but it gave us a mentality of that hard work mentality, that ability to look at the fundamentals, those very small steps that make a difference between um, making the play and not making the play. And a lot of guys will kind of glaze over that for speed or for touchdowns and not touch the fundamentals of what can make a kid better. And so I think that's one thing for guys that are trying to get in the profession, and we need more of them, is that don't sell yourself out if you weren't in the pros or even played college ball. If you go learn the fundamentals, if you research and you break down what makes a guy the best guy, and then find a way to cue that player with words and repetition and focus on that, you can make your position a whole lot better and you could be a great coach. And all the other stuff will come as you go.
Yeah. And as you were talking, coach, one thing came to mind, especially like for my position, I was a lineman, and there's always that one guy on the team that's maybe a little undersized, probably not going to go play college ball, but is a solid high school player just because he knows the fundamentals. Like he's a technician at making the proper steps, making proper hand placement and just staying low if you're an offensive lineman. So it's like those little things. And like you were saying, maybe somebody who's 6'5", 330 doesn't need to do that when they're playing high school ball quite as much as the guy who's 5'10", 220, so I totally understand what you're saying there. And it's, you see it all the time too.
And you make a great point, because now coaches are going to have to evolve because kids aren't big anymore. They have a very self-image, and because we were looking at this as a staff, that even if you look at average weight of linemen, growing up, most of my friends that played line, the average starting line was about 330 at a high school level in Katy, Texas. But now it's closer to 275 or even lower. And so now you have to really make sure kids are stronger and that they're getting the fundamentals of the weight room, and having to adjust your offensive schemes or even defensive schemes to match what is happening and changing and evolving in the game.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, that's exactly it. And one concept that I talked about with somebody else on this podcast was just you can never be complacent with what you know, because things are always changing. And you look at one example I always think about is like Bill Belichick. Like, he's one of the best coaches of all time. And at the same time, over the past couple of years, maybe his coaching style is a little bit outdated, where guys aren't necessarily relating to him as much. And I don't really know, but that's just something that came to mind. And it's always just knowing the audience, but also understanding, like, what are you good at, and what has changed over the years, maybe.
And I think you get reliant on a guy named Tom Brady. For many, many, many years, you get kind of in a tradition, and you lose a piece. And if you're not, and I think sometimes we think that just because you're an NFL guy or an NCAA guy, that these guys don't have blind spots um, or get comfortable in routines, and they don't understand whenever they miss that piece how to fix it, or what are we doing in the future to kind of adjust for it. And then whenever you're faced with those situations and you don't, it gets kind of hard. And the game's evening out. There's because of so much copying and so much knowledge out there, and sports science has developed athletes into higher levels. um, it's really made the game more even.
Yeah. And the thing too is, like you were saying, there's so many different tools out there. Like my company, CoachTools, like that's just one thing. And there's a million other things out there that coaches can utilize. And it's all great, but I think the thing that it comes down to is, you have to be able to prioritize, like, what's actually going to help you in your situation. And like you were saying, it's almost like evening out. So it's like you have to really have a good pulse on the just on the program in general, and what are your kids' strengths, what's your coaching strengths. So that's definitely another thing too that's important. So before we finish up here, Coach, any last words you want to share with the audience?
um, Make sure, so there's several things that are happening in coaching with younger guys coming in, that want certain levels quickly. I started out at the junior high level. I was willing to kind of go from a perspective of learning everything first before I kind of moved up. And I'm not saying that has to be every guy, but the things that are going to get you noticed and hired are not your football knowledge. It's going to be showing up earlier before everyone else. It's going to be doing the laundry when no one else is doing it. It's going to be making sure that all those little things are taken care of, whether you're asked or not asked, and being available. Now, don't burn yourself out, because that's kind of the other half of that coin. You got to understand your limits and protect kind of your own mentality, and get into a routine to where you're going to be working more in the football season, but don't be afraid to take off a Friday whenever it's testing week or kind of the low end seasons, and you have meetings and you have those small things. And also make sure you work for guys who understand when it's time to work, it's time to work, but when it's time to rest, or we need to schedule that rest, that's very, very important. And then also the weight room. I'm a strength and conditioning coach. That's kind of my wheelhouse. Go gain. If you don't have an S&C guy, go learn something. I learned about the weight room because I was also a head baseball coach, and the athletic director that I had worked for was burning out my baseball players. And I mean, I kind of knew what I did growing up, but I didn't understand the science behind it. I didn't understand how fatigued worked. I didn't understand even what the difference between reps and percentages of the weight room that create strength versus weights and reps that create muscle growth or power, or all those expressions that translate to speed or translate to injury prevention. And I watched a lot of my baseball players die in the middle of the season because of kind of this running program that wasn't producing speed, and then kind of the weight room mentality. And that kind of motivated me to go get a CSCS and learn about this stuff, and to now be able to speak to head coaches if they don't understand what they're doing to players. Because a lot of times we just get into the old do hard thing mentality of Bear Bryant, I'm going to beat you up and make you puke, and if you're not puking, you're not getting better. And that's really just not scientifically accurate, and it's not going to benefit our players. And we have to understand how to push, how to create adaptation, how to get the most out of our players where we are pushing them hard, but we're getting what we need out of them the right way. And if you don't know what that is and you have no one on your staff, go find that guy. Go find that guy that's willing to, hey, sir, this is not going to work, or we need to adjust this. And there's a lot of head coaches that many times are stuck in the traditional ways and don't want to hear newer science or look at things because they went through it or they did this at this program. And so I would highly encourage guys to go learn as much as you can about science and exercise science, just so you know, because I mean, you're lucky at a program if you have a strength and conditioning coach, and that's something we need to have more conversations with administrators and district personnel. Just like an athletic trainer, we need that strength guy who works with athletic trainers and prevention of injuries, and to kind of develop strength and conditioning for every athlete, because not every athlete's the same. Some athletes are going to get it, other athletes are going to need something else. And if you don't understand that, you might miss opportunities to really develop that athlete. So those are some of the things. Be willing to work, learn as much as you can, and do not talk that first year. Be a yes, sir. Be willing to listen a whole lot more, even if you think you're right. And one skill I teach high school kids nowadays, instead of voicing your opinion in a statement, or if you notice that something is wrong, that 100% is wrong, don't voice it as a statement. Voice it as a question. Because a question kind of presents the idea that I could be wrong, or I'm just trying to learn. But if the person you're asking it to understands the question, then they understand, oh, we may need to fix this, or, oh, there might be something we need to adjust or do differently.
Definitely. Well, yeah, thank you very much for the advice, Coach, and best of luck as you're going up towards the baseball season and during the winter.
I appreciate it.